Let's clean up the network rack, shall we? Good thing I was an offensive lineman in a past life, because this rack right behind me is unbelievably heavy. It's a StarTech rack with casters on the bottom, and if you're going to get a home rack, I recommend getting casters so you can roll this thing around. We have a lot of equipment in this rack. There are multiple servers, multiple disk chassis, we have a switch, we have a firewall. We're going to be cleaning it all up, getting a new UPS unit installed, and getting all of that new Ubiquiti equipment placed in it. So this video will be more on organizing the rack, trying to do some cable management, trying to do some wire and power wire management in the back, and putting everything back together and making sure it works. I have to try to work quickly because our internet is down and my kids want to watch Disney+. Here we go. This is just a quick overview of the history of the rack. Started out very simple, started out with a completely different rack, have slowly evolved to add a ton of equipment. So this has been a long work in progress, and I'm excited to get it finally cleaned up. So I've clearly already started removing things, and it helps when you hit record when you're trying to capture all of this activity. However, up at the top of the switch rack, or the network rack, was all of my patch panel, my switch, my old switch, my firewall, and my ISP equipment. So I took all that out, unplugged all the cables that are running from the servers and various equipment below to make some room for the cloud key that you're seeing going in. That has the nice rack mount kit, and the cloud key is over on the right hand side, flipped upside down and plugged in so that you can have it nicely displayed in the rack versus it just sitting on a shelf. This is the Ubiquiti 48-port switch that you can see the unboxing in a prior video. What we're doing now is installing the ear kits. Most switches come with ear kits or rack mount kits that you can install so that you can place it in a rack. They're fine sitting on a shelf, but if you have a rack, you should put it in the rack. It looks cleaner and certainly nicer. It's just like any other switch model out there, Cisco, Juniper, you name it. They all come with these kits. In some cases, switches allow you to mount in the front, center, or rear, depending on the orientation in the rack. With Ubiquiti, these are very light switches, almost always access switches. At least this particular model, which is a standard model, is going to be just an access switch, not going to be sitting next to servers or anything specifically. In this case they are, but you get what I'm saying, I hope. So this is going to get installed right above the Ubiquiti cloud key. And I'm trying here not to have it sit. It's nice if you can have a second set of hands, but when you don't, unfortunately these switches are lighter than most, you don't want it to lean on that rack mount kit. That rack mount kit is very, I don't want to call it flimsy. It's not flimsy. It's just that the only thing holding it up is the rack mount kit in the back. And if it leans on that cloud key, it could break it or put pressure on it that would affect the way it's connected to the rack mount kit. You just want to be careful there when you're installing. And this is with any equipment. You don't want to lean it on other equipment if you don't have to, and you want to try to support it. There are some pieces of equipment out there today that allow you to kind of stick like a 1U shelf in temporarily to support the weight of a device you're mounting, but I'm not that fancy, so we're just going to do it manually. This is the SRX300 firewall that I'm using. Big fan of Juniper. I've used them a lot in work and pursued a number of their certifications. They are a good product. I like them from a networking perspective. I got my start with my CCNA. However, I've learned to like the way Juniper handles their operating system. So I like them so much I decided to get it as a home firewall just so I can continue learning how it works and what it does. I do not have a rack mount kit here. Ooh, I'm getting the fiber and SFPs ready. I do not have a rack mount kit yet. I have since ordered that and installed it. But what we're doing here is we're going to set up the SFP module. So this is a multi-mode LC to LC fiber patch. And that's usually used for shorter runs between local devices. And these SFP modules, just got them online. I'll put some information in the video description about where I got all the equipment for this. But I used to never know how these things worked way back when, and I was always curious how you plug these in. So I had since worked with them, but what you do is you take these little caps off. I had once tried to plug them in with the caps on. I had no idea how they worked. But you just take those little caps off and they expose the terminal ends of the fiber cable. And then they plug right into that transceiver, nice and snug, and they'll clip in. And then they slide right into the SFP ports on the devices. In this case, the Ubiquiti switch has 4 1 gig SFP ports that go into the Juniper's 1 gig SFP port. So my handy camera work right there. So what we're going to do is plug that in, and that's going to be our uplink port. So we're going to conserve all of the Ethernet ports for just that, for being access ports and configuring port profiles, and we're going to set up some VLANing and other stuff in here to segment the network a bit. But now I have that SFP module set up inside the SRX. I am going to go into the configuration. I don't think at this point I had modified the configuration for that to be the uplink. However, went in, made that change, and everything has since lit up and is working just fine. The front of the unit has the UPS, the 2 Gen 8 servers, Gen 9 server with a SAN, cloud key, switch, firewall, and the Raspberry Pi there to the left. From the back, the Comcast box is installed and patched into the SRX. It's all sitting on that shelf. And then we have the servers from behind. We have power cables running on the left-hand channel down to what you'll see in a moment here, an APC surge protection unit. So that's just a PDU that's plugged into the battery backup that's in the front of the rack. And that's just for power management and obviously surge protection, which is important, just to make this nice and tidy. Here we've gotten consoled into the SRX. That's to configure the SFP module that's plugged in the Ubiquiti switch. Also on the right hand side, you'll notice that there is a screen on these Ubiquitis. That is actually touchscreen, and you can get a lot of useful information from it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the SRX configuration, just show you a little behind the scenes, and then we'll take a look at the switch and how the switch has been configured. What we have on the screen is an application called PuTTY. That is a terminal emulator, which is a way to console into a network device. You can do that multiple ways. You can do that through SSH. You can do that through a console cable. In this case, we're going over IP address to the firewall on the network and looking at the configuration of a particular interface, the SFP interface we mentioned earlier, that is connected into the switch. In this case, we have that interface configured as a trunk. I'm going to do some future networking videos that'll explain layer 2 technologies, trunks, access ports, things like that. Right now, we have a few VLANs in production that we're going to be using for various reasons, for different testing elements, and to configure different things on the network that we don't want to be able to talk to one another. We want to keep those things segmented, such as IoT devices, things that we're doing in our lab, all of that. So right here, you can see the interface configuration. That sets it so that the interface can talk to the switch and vice versa, and you'll see once we transition to the switch configuration in the UCK, what that looks like from the Unify standpoint. And again, just here a quick show of the VLANs and their VLAN tags and all of that information. Again, all of that will come back in a future networking video. In addition, I plan to do a series just on Junos OS and Juniper products. I have achieved my JNCIA and JNCIA SEC. Really like the Junos operating system from a networking perspective and like their product line. So I'd like to get a series going on that too that'll be further down the network rabbit hole. As we shift from the firewall to see the configuration, the switching on the standard switch that we're using, and there's 3 models from Ubiquiti: Standard, Pro, and Enterprise. The standard switch is a layer 2 switch only. The Pro and Enterprise do have layer 3 functionality. So in this case, we're using what is called a router on a stick model, where the firewall is serving as the layer 3 device, doing all of the routing for the IPv4 communications on the network. And we'll see here in a moment how Ubiquiti configures trunks, port profiles, things like that related to VLANing, doing some of the layer 2 and also the IPv4 addressing just for management, from a management perspective. And I will note that it is a bit different than my experience with EX switches, Cisco CBS switches, Cisco Catalyst, even some Netgear what are called SOHO or small office home office switches. And that's just the way Ubiquiti does it. So everyone has a different way of achieving the same goal. HP has an odd way of doing trunking. So we're going to take a look at this and set it up and figure out how that all talks to one another from a Ubiquiti perspective, and then get into what we're going to do next in the series. We are now in the network application that runs on the Ubiquiti Cloud Key. There are multiple applications. In fact, in this Cloud Key instance, I have the network and protect applications. You can see the protect below. It's all the cameras. It's going to be an entirely separate video that I'm excited to record about the camera and security system in the NVR. But for this video, we're going to focus on the switch. When I click on the switch, it brings out a right-hand blade that allows me to see a good bit of information just at the first overview link and the first overview button. We can see all the switch ports that are currently in use, whether or not they're fast Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet, whether or not they're using PoE or PoE+, power availability for the PoE switch. And I will note again, this is the standard switch. Only 32 ports are PoE, the other 16 are not. And that's fine, we knew about that going in. Just something to keep in mind if you're looking at this Ubiquiti switch. Make sure you understand for your PoE needs how many switch ports you have to dedicate to PoE devices. Under here we can see the devices that are connected and the switch ports, IP address information for the IPv4 network we have set up, as well as the uplinks. And in this case, this access point has a trunk port, and I'll explain in a little bit why that is. So to see what's going on in broader detail, we click the port management link that is in the overview tab, and that brings us into a deeper view of what's going on in the switch. A unique feature to Unify, this is used in the mobile application, you can actually use an augmented reality view of the switch. So earlier in the video we mentioned there's a touch screen on the front. Displays almost like a QR link on that display, and when you scan that on your phone on the mobile app, you can slide across and see everything that's plugged in. I find that really helpful in the case where you go into an environment and you don't have a port map or have any knowledge of what devices are connected to what. You can start to see some of that information based on what the switch is able to pick up off of the network, whether or not it's an access point, a laptop, some other device. That is really, really important, and it's useful. But just looking at these ports, we can see what's in use. Again, that the PoE Gigabit Ethernet's green, PoE Plus versus regular PoE, Fast Ethernet is the light green. Then we have our SFP ports, and we can see our port profiles and the devices that are connected. You get a little bit more detail down here. And you can see there's certain things that are set up with a trunk port profile. And that includes the firewall uplink and also the link to our access point. And the reason being is you need trunk ports to allow VLAN traffic to traverse that link. So we have a trunk port going up to our firewall, so all of that VLAN traffic can communicate to the firewall and route accordingly. And also we have some SSIDs, or wireless networks, configured off of our access point, which we'll discuss in the next video where we adopt a new access point and look at what wireless configurations are set up. Those networks are those wireless networks are associated with VLANs that have specific IDs. So you need a trunk port to the wireless access point, so all of that tagged traffic can traverse that link back through the switch, up to the firewall, and out to its destination. In order to configure the trunk port, it's not as easy as just selecting this and going in, and you have to do some work here. So this Ethernet port profile doesn't exist by default. I have to create it. So to do that, when you go into your settings menu, you can see all the Wi-Fi and the different networks, and those are associated with, or different Wi-Fi names, SSIDs, and the networks they're associated to, and how those networks are built out, and the VLAN IDs. Again, we'll go deeper into that later. But to go into the profiles, Ethernet ports, you have to create a trunk port. In my experience with Juniper EX switches or CBS switches, it's a different way, a more efficient way of doing this. This is a bit of a roundabout way to configure trunk links, and it's not very intuitive out the gate. I had to do a little bit of diving into Reddit and some other forums to figure out how exactly you do this. But I eventually figured it out, and once you do, it's not too bad. So clicking into this, we can see that the port is active. The default network is our default VLAN is set, and that's defined in this networks tab. You can also define traffic restrictions, but it's a bit confusing because when you come in here, you're like, all right, well, how do I assign different VLANs to traverse this trunk from a layer 2 perspective? I don't see an option for that. Well, for whatever reason, when you click into it, even if this option's selected and you're allowing these VLANs, it deselects it when you go back into the trunk port. So just know that you have to click that and you have to select what VLANs you're going to allow and what VLANs you're going to block. And then there's a variety of other settings that you get access to for the manual setup. You can do port isolation, storm control, spanning tree if you want to prevent any type of loop in your network, and we'll talk more about that in a future networking video. There's a variety of things that you can do here. And again, it's a layer 2 switch. The functionality is limited to those layer 2 technologies, but it does give you a lot of features that you'll find on what is considered a SOHO or small office, home office switch. Does provide a lot. So again, just trying to keep things as simplified as possible, and I know I'm going in a few different directions, but the trunk port configuration, again, allows us to communicate to that firewall, pass all of this VLAN traffic around, and allows me to then set port profiles on the switch that I can use. Go ahead and leave that I can use if I want to segment the servers that are in my rack, for example, just to my lab network. I can define port profiles that those servers plug into so it's only on the lab VLAN. If I have an IoT device like my TV or a PlayStation or Xbox or whatever is using an Ethernet connection, that isn't something I need to be talking on my regular network with my laptops and other things that I'm using, I can set that up on my IoT network. And from a wireless perspective, I can do the same thing. I can have devices like a Nest or camera systems or things like that talk on IoT, and they can only talk out to the internet. They can't talk to anything else. They can't go and talk to my work laptop or my home laptop or any of those other devices. They're all segmented. And this is all being done from a layer 2 perspective with VLANs, and this switch permits us to do that. So overall, what have we looked at? We've went ahead and updated the physical network rack. We've improved the cabling and power supply. We've added a battery backup unit, a more robust battery backup unit that will support those servers, this new switching equipment, and the firewall, the Raspberry Pi, all of the things that we have connected to the network are now backed up, surge protected, and I don't have to run the risk of if I lose power, all that stuff goes hard down, and with spinning disks and other equipment, it really does reduce the risk. So what we're going to do next is look at how UniFi adopts new equipment. In this case, we have a new Wi-Fi 6 access point for the house. That is going to get adopted, and I'll walk through how you set it up from factory default, how you assign the wireless networks, what the wireless networks are, how those are set up, and do a bit of a deep dive into that. And as we continue going here, again, I'm always looking for feedback on how these videos are, whether or not they're informative. I know I jumped from being high level to a little bit deeper, so some things might not necessarily make sense, but I promise as I get better at this, my goal is to create networking videos and other things that help supplement what we're discussing in the initial setup videos for UniFi. Really liking this product, excited to continue using it in the home network and continue producing videos with it. So again, if you are interested in this content, I ask you to please like, subscribe, follow, provide feedback. I'm more than happy. You're not going to offend me. I have thick skin. Let me know where I can make improvements on the videos, and if there's any other areas of UniFi or Ubiquiti that you'd like to see. If I didn't go in enough detail here, be happy to answer some questions in the comments. On to the next one. Thank you so much for watching.